Gilbo, how's it going, indie wrestling fans? Welcome to Indy Handshake. I am your host, Jesus Cruz, and today I am joined by one half or one third or one fourth of the Snott Brothers, Seymour Snott. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great.
I met you back in 2000 when I was working with All Pro Wrestling doing their video, and you were already, by 2000, you'd already been there for a little bit, right?
Yeah, I moved into the APW boot camp around like the summer of '98. So, and then
Okay.
my class really didn't start till like January of '99. So I kind of had a head start.
Okay. Well, we'll start this off by a generic question and how you got into wrestling, and more importantly, how did you find indie wrestling in your area?
It was really tough because I grew up in Pennsylvania, and it was not to age myself, but it was the '80s, and so everybody just watched whatever was on cable television. WWF, AWA, World Class, NWA. And so I just was a huge wrestling fan as a kid. And one of my friends that I'm still tight with today, I mean, he got me into wrestling, and that was like our huge thing that we had in common. Like, we had our own little promotion with the action figures and the dolls and stuff.
Right.
And we were just like really into going to the live shows and stuff like that. So I just liked wrestling ever since I was probably about 11 years old. And it was like, just to go to the events and that, it was like, wow, this is great. I can't believe we're going to this. And a few days ago, it was funny. I found like an old ticket from like 1990 when I went to a WWF house show. So I was like,
Oh, wow.
oh, wow, this is like almost like 31 years ago I went to this. So I was just a huge wrestling fan as a kid. So, and the way I found APW was I actually bought a book on how to get into wrestling, and it was written by Paul Bear and someone named Dennis Brent, who was a magazine editor, and he did fanzines for like World Class and Bill Watts and stuff like that. And they wrote this book, and they had all these wrestling school addresses and stuff. And I was writing to them because at the time I was actually in the Air Force, and this is still like pre-internet days. So it's like not everything was out there. And I just went online, or I just started sending letters and stuff like that. So around like 1995, I got a letter or a package actually from Roland. And it was like, hey, we got this school up in Hayward, California and everything. And I was looking at it, and it was back in the mid 90s when guys like, it was like Mike Modest, Mike Diamond, who'd later become Max Justice. There was Joe Applebomber, and they had Matt Heisen there. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, these guys look pretty big. And I actually went up in '96 to look at the school, and Roland was telling me, he's like, well, he's like, Matt Heisen's only like 140 pounds. And I was like, really? And he's like,
Right.
yeah, we trained him, and he was going to be a manager, and then, he could take bumps and everything. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of thought about it for a while, and I actually had to go overseas, and I was in England for a while, and I was going to all wrestling shows I could find. Like, I went to a couple indie shows there, and then I went to the one night only pay-per-view WWE ran there. And it was weird because like we were Americans, like there was only three of us, and we're at this British pay-per-view, and we were booing the British Bulldog because we were like huge heels. Like, we were like, let's get over his heels. But
Right.
and I was reading newsletters and stuff like that at the time. I was trying to smart myself up to everything. And then when I got out of the Air Force, I moved home to Pennsylvania for about a month or so. And then I drove cross country to California, and I said, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. And it was funny because when I went to the APW boot camp back then, there was probably about 35 to 40 guys as students.
Oh,
I was like,
wow.
oh my God. And you could tell how big wrestling was like in the late 90s, especially with the Attitude Era. Like, everybody was trying to get in because you had WWE, ECW, WCW, you had Japan, Mexico, and it was a huge deal back then. And it was just a long, you don't think about it now, but it's like, 25 years ago or so when
Right.
Wrestling was really hot.
Right. What were the crowds like in England, like compared to like an American indie crowd?
They were excited because they got to see, like, I went to a show where they had Rob Van Dam and Sabu and Mikey Whipwreck came over there, and they were all, they were really getting into the wrestling a lot like the American crowds, where they just loved all the action and stuff like that. So it was kind of hard though, because like they did have their own indies, but it was they were a little bit behind ours, but they were starting to get more talent. Like I think it was probably the era when guys like Doug Williams had started. So
right.
They were, like they were getting a little bit better with how they started working in that.
As far as technical wise, because that, Doug Williams, when he would come to Hayward to like at King of Indies, it's like his style. I remember watching them. I'm like, oh wow, this guy's awesome.
Yeah, it was definitely, he was ahead of his time, and I think that that was probably even before like Nigel McGuinness. So
right. So moving to California, moving to the West Coast, how was it like training? Who were your main trainers, and how was it like training? Was it what you expected? What were some of the shocks of going from fan to worker?
Um, it was basically physically, I was okay with it, but it was like taking bumps was like really like, it was like you basically had to sacrifice everything. I was like, okay, and it took me a little while, but like at the beginning, it was Mike Modest, Donovan Morgan, Vinny Massaro, Frank Murdoch. Those were like the main trainers back then, and I mean, and it was kind of like, you think about it and it's like, okay, I'd go through all the bumps and everything like that, and then later on you're like, you don't think about it. So it was like at the beginning you're like, oh my god, I can't do this, it's so hard. And then after a while, when you start working matches, you're like, oh, this isn't so bad, and you really don't feel it as much, because the crowd actually pumps you up a lot,
Right,
and you get that
right.
adrenaline flowing. So sometimes at practice, it was kind of like, man, I'm going to get, like it was like doing squats or wall sits and stuff like that wasn't so bad. It was getting in the ring and it's like, man, I got to go take bumps. But after a while, you get used to it. And you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of like second nature now. Just don't
Right.
think about it.
Do you remember, or did you take the conditioning classes with Greg Thurston?
I don't think I did. I think I was a little bit passed out of that. I was a little bit out of that by that time, but I was
Yeah.
doing mostly like semi-pro stuff like that. But I was
Right.
pretty much working out on my own anyhow. So
Yeah. Yeah. And before we get into how you got the gimmick for Seymour Snott and the Snott Brothers, APW was they did put a lot of effort into character development. They also had promo classes. I remember because I have a couple of your promos from promo
great.
class.
July 28th, the Snott Brothers are going to be facing the West Side Players, O.G., Jimmy Rip, and Shane Dynasty's Big Max Justice. Well, you know what? The Snott Brothers have something in their corner. Not only will we have Betty Beefcake, but we're going to have the new monster of APW, our cousin, our brother from another mother, Dilip Snott. And he's going to crush all of you and take care of you like he should, because you know what? We're sick and tired of being picked on. Jimmy Riff, you, the crack daddy, should know most about being picked on. Well, this time, those new teeth of yours are going to get knocked out permanently. And as for the West Side Players, OGs, what does OG stand for? How about old garbage men? Because that's exactly what you guys look like wearing those jumpsuits. You look like a couple rejects from the mid-1980s WWF. So we'll see you guys in Vallejo with our big brother, and for once and for all, we're going to the top.
Good. That's good.
How were you dealing with that side of aspect of wrestling, the promos and interview?
It wasn't too hard, because like they kind of gave you a time, and it was funny when they gave you a time, there was a big clock on the wall. So like I could actually see the second hand moving. And I was like, okay, if I could just beat that second hand as it goes around and get in everything I have to say, I'll be good. So, and it was trying to figure out ways of like, just little swarmy things I could say. And it was hard because like I was a baby face mostly, and I really wanted to come off as a nerd, but it was also trying to come off very smart too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do remember that. Yeah. And how long from when you started training to your debut match, and how was your debut match?
It was funny. I think my real training started in January of '99, and then my first real match was was October. But like I refereed a couple times, and the first few times I was thrown in as a referee, I had to referee midget matches,
Mm-hmm.
and that really, like, a lot of guys that referee matches, it's like, you really learn how to work when you start working with people that you have to do spots with, and you're like, oh, okay, this is how it works. But
Okay.
I had a really good trainer with Vinny. He really did a lot in trying to get me, like, just not to go out there and get my ass kicked. He's like, you got to have offense. You got to have offense, and let's come up with some cool shit for you. And it's like, okay, and I worked with him a lot on it. And building up to my debut match, I mean, it felt great just after it was over. It was like, oh, okay, it went all the way to this point.
Right. Do you remember who your debut match was against?
It was against Vinny as Little Dick Grimes and Nathaniel Sweet as Sweetie Pie the Clown.
Okay.
So, and it was me and George C. Snott. So it was like, okay, George, he had a little bit more experience in that than I did, but it was like, okay, I know where I'm at. I know what I'm going to take, and everything's going to be cool because I'm going to be in good hands.
Is George C. Snott later became Scott Snott?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And I think he still works to this day. I think he's still he's down in Southern California now.
Right. I do remember he moved to Southern California. So how did the Snott Brothers gimmick come about?
Well, they were doing something in the school one day, and they had like a bike helmet, and Mike Modest was having people put it on, and I think like I put it on, and I had a pair of glasses or something, and he says, "That's it." He goes, "That's your gimmick. You're going to be a nerd." And I'm sitting there thinking, "Oh man, all this to be a nerd." And I kind of thought about it. I didn't really. I was like, okay, and it really took me a while to take it off, to like figure out where I could go with it, because
Right.
when I came here to wrestle in North Carolina, I still had the gimmick, and I wanted to do something else, but then I thought about, I can still be the nerd. I could just change things up a little bit and kind of
Right.
add some things because no one else was doing it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And what were some of the memorable matches or moments that you had as the Snott Brothers in All Pro Wrestling? I know you had a lot of feuds with the Ballard Brothers.
Ballard Brothers were definitely up there. I would say some of the matches I had with Boom Boom Kamini and Super Destroyer, who became Bison Smith. Those were some good matches.
Right.
Probably the one match where I think it was like the Snott Brothers and Sean Patrick O'Doul against like John Cena, the prototype at that time, just to say, hey, I got my name in there with a future WWE superstar.
Yeah.
Matches against Great Khali. I mean, just to work some of those names, him, Samoa Joe, Frankie Kazarian, just to get yourself out there and to work those names and be like, yeah, like, okay, I've worked some names before.
And it's a trip not knowing where everyone's going to go. At that time, you probably didn't know Cena was going to be as big as he was. Great Khali was going to be, signed. It's just a trip. Like, oh my God, these are just guys that I work with. You know what I mean?
Right. You just don't know how far they were going to get. Like when I moved here to North Carolina, I was like telling people, like, yeah, I had to work John Cena or the prototype. And they're like, oh, the guy in Ohio Valley. And I said, yeah, I think he's going to go a little bit past Ohio Valley.
Yeah. Yeah. Now talk to us about other members of the Snott Brothers. We have Betty Beefcake. You got Big Peter Snott. So tell us how it was, adding to the family, to the Snott Brothers name.
It was a lot of fun, and I felt it added like an entertainment aspect to APW. It was kind of like we were kind of like the less serious Dudley Boys, like we could go out there and do funny shtick, and it was okay. I didn't mind it at all. I mean, I liked working with Big Peter. Betty was, like putting spots together with her was fun. So
right.
It was a good experience. just to get out there and kind of do the fun stuff, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And any other memorable moments from your time at APW or favorite places to work?
I would probably say when we did the shows in Vacaville, or not Vacaville, Vallejo.
In
Those were
Vallejo,
probably
Mare
fun
Island?
times. Yeah, and some of the King of Indie shows were fun to do. So yeah, it was definitely good. It was good groundwork for your wrestling career. You know, you learned how to deal with different situations, and the training was probably the best, you know, you could have.
Right. And now, when you moved over here, did you live in the gym? Because a lot of guys would bunk in there.
Yeah, I lived in the gym for 2 years. So,
Okay.
you know, it was either cold in the wintertime or hot in the summertime. So,
Right.
it definitely humbles you quite a bit.
Yeah. And I would imagine that it also makes your relationship stronger with the co-wrestlers, you know, because you guys are living together, you guys see each other all the time. What were some of the ribs that you guys would pull each other? Because I know we had Apollo Khan Darnell on here, we had a Betty Beefcake, and they talked a little bit about ribbing Great Khali. So what are some of the ribs that you remember that took place?
Oh, let me think. Let's see. There's a lot of water dumping on while you're taking a shower. That happened quite a bit. Let's see.
Like they would just come in right with like a bucket and like,
Well, they dump it over the shower stall. So, you know, there was always stuff like that going on. You know, there was always like people banging on your door like really hard. And then there was things like, you know, you would like kind of like um you know, like when I lived with Bison, it was so funny because like we would go out and like, you know, like we'd get back to the gym and stuff like that. And like for some reason he'd go in my room and sleep in my bed, and I'd end up sleeping in his bed. And I could remember one time, I think it was like at Christmas, where there was a big room at the end of the hallway, and the guy that was living there went home and he left his heater on, and Modest found it still on. He was like, "Oh my God, he's going to burn the gym down." So like he turned it off and he threw it down and smashed it. And we're like, "Oh, well, you know, it wasn't us." So like, I think like when the guy came back, like Mike came home and me and Bison were in our rooms. And I remember like Mike was, you know, yelling at this guy, and we were like in our rooms, like, "Man, I hope he doesn't come in here and see us." You know, I hope we didn't piss him off.
Yeah. You know, going back to the gimmick and the glasses, obviously you're still rocking the gimmick. You know, you made the best out of the Seymour Snott character. But we did interview the Ballard brothers, and they did a similar thing with the glasses. And I remember one of the Ballard brothers said that Bubba Ray Dudley made a big deal out of that, out of them wearing the same kind of. Did you ever have any kind of like, hey, you know, we do this or anything like that?
No, I've never had any problems at all. I mean, you know, I think after a while the Dudleys kind of reached a new level, so they could do whatever they want. It's like, and besides, you know, they're not, you know, like when they were original ECW characters, and you know, like they did their stuff and they went one step beyond, you know. And it's like, dude, I'm a nerd. I'm not a tough guy. So I totally different gimmick.
Yeah. Now, how did you feel like you guys did you guys feel like you guys got the respect that you deserved at APW, being a tag team, having this nerd character, or do you think that you guys could have had more of a push, like a singles push, more like in the championship radar?
I think we could have done something more to add, but you know, I think that you know, they were probably going in a different direction, and I kind of was like, you know, I like California, but I was starting to get homesick too. And I think around that time, I was just like, you know, there's all this stuff going on, and it's like I kind of want to do my own thing. And I, you know, it was fine for what it was, and you know, like it just, I think it was time for a change, and you got to do that every once in a while, you know.
Right. And speaking of change, in 2001, 2002, there was a big change. You know, if not more, less than half, around half of the roster left and split and started Pro Wrestling Iron. What was your stance, or what was your point of view at that time? Because you stayed with APW, I believe.
Yeah, I actually I was on my way out the door. That was when I was going to move to North Carolina. So, and I was pretty close with Mike and Donovan. So like, I was like, I kind of got to follow these guys. I was a little bit more loyal to them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, and since I was like gone from the picture, I didn't really get involved in any of the drama. So I was like, you know what? I'm kind of doing my own thing right now, but I was
Right.
pretty tight with Mike and Donovan. So I was like, and even Bison. So I was like, well, I'll come back. And, like they offered me a couple spots to work for them a few years later. And I was like, you know what? He goes, you guys invited me. Cool. So, and I really didn't have any like heat, like I wasn't pissed off at APW or Roland or anything like that. I was
Right.
like, they're doing their thing. That's cool, but I'm going to do my own thing. So,
right. Now, from when you were, when you left, when you went back home around that time, was Scott Snott's story kind of the similar? I think he also went to LA right after when that split was going on, right?
yeah, I think he went down for XPW and that
Yes.
was cool. And I kept in touch with him. I actually, probably about 7 years ago, got back in touch with him really good. And, it was like, it was good to talk to him and everything. And we're like, yeah, how's this going and that going and stuff. So, but I didn't really communicate with him all that much, because, like this was like the early thousands, and really nobody had social media up until like 2005 or 2006. So it was
Right.
like, there's a few years where everybody's out of the loop. So
Right. And now tell us what happened after leaving APW. You said went to North Carolina. Did you start finding another promotion out there? Like what was up with Seymour Snott after APW?
well, what happened was, I moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and my sister lived down here. So I was like, I came down and I really didn't have any plans at the immediate moment. I was like, okay, I was still trying to find a job and everything. And I was here for about a week, and there was a promotion running downtown Raleigh called Southern Championship Wrestling. And they had like C.W. Anderson, Toad or Frog from WCW was there, Chili Willie, and occasionally like the Hardy Boys would come by, Shane Helms. So it was kind of like their old promotion before they all got signed. And so I took a videotape. That's such a foreign concept now. And
Hey, I got a whole bunch up here, man.
and a couple pictures. And I just went down to the show and I said, I met the promoter and I said, hey, my name's told him my name and everything, and gave him all my information. And then this was like November of 2001. So like by January of 2002, I started working shows for him. And the promoter was like, yeah, he's like, I like the gimmick, you got something different. Everybody else is doing the same thing. And I was like, okay, well, this is it. I'll just be different. So
Right.
I kept the gimmick, but I changed it a little bit. So since I wasn't in a tag team anymore, so I had to be more of a solo. So
Right.
the checkered shorts came out and everything, and the shirts with the sleeves got cut off. So I said, I got to just change it for me and start doing more comedy and be a little bit more different than everyone else on the card.
Yeah. And you got way more jacked than I remember you being at APW, man.
Yeah, I worked out a little bit harder. I started eating my chicken breast and drinking my creatine more. So
Okay. And tell us, before COVID, where were you? I see you post a lot of pictures. What promotion? What can you tell us about that promotion?
Oh, well, the promotion originally I started with the Southern Championship Wrestling, and they kind of closed in 2004. But what ended up happening was in 2006, we started running under the name of G.O.U.G.E, which was Gimmick's only underground grappling entertainment. And we wanted to do more of a comedy-based wrestling promotion. So we kind of changed some things around a little bit, and we were more inviting to Gimmicks because at that era was also where a lot of guys were running wrestling shows, and they were like, oh, like we want to be like the NWA or WCW because they closed down. And it's like, it's kind of hard to do that because that was already done. So you kind of have to go in a different direction.
Right.
So, and like WWE went from World Wrestling Federation to World Wrestling Entertainment. So, it's like you've got to follow that success.
What were your goals in wrestling when you first signed up at APW versus where you are now? Like, how have your goals changed, if they've changed?
Well, when I first got into wrestling, I think my goals were always to be like to get to like a ECW or Japan and use that to go to like a WCW or WWF or WWE. And I think that's like everybody's goal is to get to, the World Wrestling Entertainment or Federation. You want to get up to that level because they're the,
right.
They're number one. The only thing I think that started changing was, like over the last 19 years was like, and now 20 years, sorry, is that you've only got one player in town and it is really hard to get to that level. So, I like wrestling. I have fun with it. I don't hate it like a lot of people do, but I'm cool with what I've done, so I have no qualms about what I've done and what I haven't done. I'm very happy that, like I'm not someone who was seriously injured or anything like that. So
right.
I just had fun with it and it's been, a great part of my life.
Right. What about outside of wrestling? What kind of stuff do you, I see like in the background, you have like a comic book thing. Are you into like comics? Are you into drawing or anything creative outside of wrestling?
I do some, I try to draw as much as I can. Of course, when you got a shoot job, it's kind of hard. Outside of wrestling, I'm just trying to stay in shape and that, I spend time watching my nephew. He takes a lot of my time up. So, so far it's a good life. I can't complain.
Right. Okay. And tell us some of your favorite road stories. I know in APW, you guys traveled a lot to little towns like Cloverdale and King City. Has there been any funny moments, any crazy moments that have happened in the road story?
There's been a few trips, mostly like, I would say like when we did the King City shows because they were so late at night, like we're like, oh, we don't have to be there till like 6 o'clock. And then you're like coming home at like 4 a.m. Some of the, and it was at a time too when guys not everybody had a cell phone, so like, or a smartphone. So it was like you're either sitting in the car talking or you're just trying to stay awake because it's like, you've got a 3.5 hour drive sometimes. But some of the funny stuff, I think, like driving, especially in the South, you see a lot of weird stuff on the side of the road. We've gotten lost in Virginia and you see someone on the side of the road and, it's like 12 o'clock in the afternoon and they're already like half baked. So, and it's like you get to see parts of the country, like I think one of my favorite shows I worked was I did a Mark Curtis show. I did the last Mark Curtis show. And it was so weird because it was like we drove all the way to like Tennessee and like like I'm like, wow, there's like nothing out here, there's like mountains and stuff and it was so weird seeing like Mick Foley come to the show and work in the clothes that he drove to the shows and then leave in the same clothes. It's like, dude, are you taking a shower or anything? That was kind of weird. But like some of the shows, like we went up to like we did a couple shows up in Pittsburgh, the Deaf WrestleFest shows for Lord Zoltan. And one of them was the last show that J.J. Dillon actually wrestled a match on. And I think me and him were the only two guys in the dressing room that actually brushed our teeth before we went out. So I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So is that common? Is that just like common etiquette, like common sense etiquette, or is that something that's actually taught? Like, because I do remember when Frank Murdoch was training people at Pro Wrestling Iron, he would mention about how important it is to, get there showered, he said, I'm going to smell like, like your very first date. Almost, so that is something that's taught.
Yeah, it's just you don't want to be the guy with the dirty knee pads, like some of the shows I've been to, it's like, oh my God, I go, do you guys actually wash your gear, and it's a tough thing to train people because you got to go from like, it's like someone, you can't be pig pen all the time. So
right. So going back a little bit to your APW days, did you work any other indies around at the time, or were you kind of just exclusively working with APW?
I took a couple bookings. We Boom Boom Kamini and Boyce Legrand. We went to a couple shows in Fresno, and I had to work as the referee, and I had to referee every match for 2 shows. And the main event, the big star they brought in was the Iron Sheik. So like I had to referee the Iron Sheik. And I'm like, wow. And I'm like telling people, it's like, wow, I actually worked with the Iron Sheik,
Right.
So it's like, I can say that, and I remember like, he had Boom Boom in the camel clutch, and he's like, get the fuck out of the way, because they wanted to take a picture. And I'm like, all right, and I had to carry his Gimmick clubs to the ring. So he was a very different individual.
I bet. What has been can you tell us instance or story of when a promoter was being shady or not wanting to pay you, or the funniest reason of why not getting paid? You don't have to say names if you don't want to.
Oh, I can say the name. We had a promoter in, I think it was High Point. His name was Wayne Wilson, and he was always running these shows, and guys were always talking about him shorting people, like on their pay. And I remember like, he was like, oh, I'll pay, 50 to come in, $50. And I'm like, I was working at the time. I had a day job. I'm like, the money's not going to matter. I'm going to have money to get home and eat. So I remember the show as it was going on, he was like packing up stuff to leave. And I was like, what the heck's going on here? And it was funny because Baby Doll and her daughter were there, and like he was just getting ready to right before the main event was over, he was pretty much ready to tear the ring down and get the heck out of there.
Right.
And everybody was outside like confronting him about their pay and stuff. And I looked over at someone and I said, well, I guess we're going to get some McDonald's coupons maybe. So I just was like, I go, I'm not going to be one of those guys, and so, of course, like the next day, his Facebook page got deleted and everything got changed, and people were slamming him and stuff like that. And I just kind of had a chuckle about it. So,
yeah, there's a lot of that going on, man.
Yeah.
What about a crazy fan interaction that you've had at a show?
Well, this really didn't involve me, but I was in the dressing room when it happened, and one guy, I think, was giving someone's kid he was giving him hell. And so it was like, he was just being a heel. And so later on, we're in the dressing room after the show was over, and I'm getting dressed. And I remember someone's wife, she was the mother. She came in the back and she was yelling at the guy. And she just like out of nowhere blurts like, I'm going to shoot you and stuff like that. And everybody like got real quiet. They're like, oh, this isn't going to be good. So of course, like someone called a cop and everyone's yelling and stuff. So then like a week later, I was on the show with the same guy, and we paid someone to go to the Dollar Tree and buy like a bunch of toy guns. And so when he was coming out for his match, he got up on the ring and he's standing there, and like 3 or 4 fans stood up with toy guns and pointed it at him. And he was like, hey man, that's not funny, man. So like everyone's, like everyone in the back was laughing. And it was like, for him, he was probably pissed off, but You know, it was just one of those things that happened, and you tell the wrong guy and they're going to take advantage of it and play a rib on you.
Yeah. That's funny. What have been some of the bigger opportunities that you've had in pro wrestling? And it doesn't only have to be in wrestling, like maybe wrestling opened the door or exposure for something else you wanted to do.
You know, it's been like usually on some shows, like a couple of years ago, like they put me in the ring. A lot of guys were using me to like, because I lived in Raleigh and some of the shows I lived are like further out. So a lot of times, like I was driving names and stuff like that. Like I drove Ken Anderson and I drove Tommy Dreamer and stuff. And it was good to listen to these guys and get their views on stuff like that. And, you know, Tommy Dreamer, just out of like, I mean, 100% gentleman, you know, he was really cool, you know, and, you know, it was, you know, like I remember it was funny because like we were going to the show and I didn't say anything. And he says, well, you passed the neck pillow test. I didn't fall asleep on you. So congratulations. We're both married now. And I'm like, oh, great. and so like it was also like some of the shows, like especially for as long as I've been working, like a lot of promoters would put me in with the names. You know, like I worked a very young Scott Dawson. He was just starting out. And, you know, it's like, oh yeah, you know, I know him, you know, like I wrestled him like back in 2006, you know? So,
Yeah.
but it was like, it's a huge deal. Like when a promoter puts you in there with a name, because they're expecting you to have, you know, the names definitely expect you to rise up to a level, you know? And it was like, you know, just to tell people, it's like, yeah, you know, I've worked like Barbarian. It's like, that's kind of cool, you know?
Right. And how were they? Like, how were their attitudes working with, you know, considered an indie guy, or how did you perceive these guys? Like, oh shit, I'm working a name.
Like for example, like Caprice Coleman, I've known him very well from Ring of Honor, and he's always been really a class act to me. Barbarian, 100% pro. He'll tell you everything, and he'll make it as easy as possible. And you go in there and it's like, okay, I'm with this guy that's like twice my size.
Right.
I know what to do. I'll just go out there and make him look like $1 million. So
yeah,
it's really some of those guys. And I'm really good friends with one of the Duck brothers, Otto Schwanz. He was bowed up in ECW, and wrestling with him and knowing him has just been an absolute pleasure. He, you know, like actually Brian Kendrick put me over with him really well because we did some shows at APW and they talk, you know, regularly. And he's like, oh yeah, he goes, Spanky told me about you and he put you over really good. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I'm in with this guy, you know? So it's just an honor and a pleasure, you know?
Yeah. What were the biggest differences between working and training in the West Coast versus East Coast?
I think with the West Coast, it was like, especially in the late 90s, you know, when you had a school set up, especially where the APW school was, it was in a warehouse. And everybody at that time, especially in the late 90s, was trying to be signed. So guys were like, you know, it was like they were either at the gym, they were tanning, they were at the school. Right. And when I moved down to North Carolina, it was right around the time WWE bought out WCW and ECW, and things were a little bit different. And the wrestling schools were kind of more in like barns, and that's not putting anyone down or anything at all, but it was just like, you know, you've got to have a place to put a ring, and, you know, cities, you know, rent in cities is expensive. So people found the best places possible to put a ring, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and I used a lot of the training methods that I learned at APW, like when I started training guys. So I think it was a good foundation for what I had to start, you know.
Okay. And tell us about the started training. How did you make the transition to a trainer? How do you feel now being a trainer?
It's pretty confident. Like I trained Timmy Lou Retton, and he was just a kid. He was real hungry about getting into wrestling, and he showed a lot of desires. So I just started him off on the basics, like, okay, here's how you do a forward roll. Here's how you do a lockup. And then after that, we built on everything. And I was very proud of him. He made it to the Super 8 twice. So, and he's had appearances in NXT. So he's doing really good for himself. And he's been doing the AML shows in North Carolina and stuff. And he's been getting around too on the indie scene himself. So I was very proud of him. So I think maybe the next step for me as a trainer is just to have a regular school.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great, man. Passing all that great knowledge that you have, especially the style, the West Coast style, I think was very, very solid foundation. Like guys like Modest and guys like that. I think they really changed the game when it came to training. Like Rick Thompson changed the game of the way that they trained in the Bay Area back then. It was mainly like, here, let me give you 50 snap mares. Let me beat the shit out of you. Let me see if you come back. That was more of the old school style. But I think Rick Thompson was the first one to actually introduce a manual of how to do wrestling, and definitely amateur wrestling was a big deal. Did you know amateur wrestling before going at APW, or did you learn just what Rick and Modest taught?
I wrestled like a couple years in high school, and that was about it. But my thing was like when I wrestled in high school, I was thinking like, oh, this is like WWF, and I was like, and people were like, my wrestling coach was like, no, it's real sports. And I was like, oh, I want to do this stuff on TV. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. I think that all of us in high school had the same thing. I'm going to get into wrestling. Wait, this is boring. The hell is this? Let's go outside and wrestle on the mats. We'll do a swanton dives.
Yeah.
What have been some of have you had any embarrassing moments in the ring or at a show?
Nothing's really been too embarrassing. I think I've always turned everything into like a positive, like sometimes you have like your opponent, he's kind of like slow on the uptake, or and you're just kind of like having to make someone that doesn't look that well look better. And like sometimes people have always say it's just like, you kind of oversell. And I go, well, I have to like compensate, but I think overselling is better than underselling. But
right.
No, I don't really think I've had too many embarrassing moments. So
okay. What about the weirdest venue you've ever worked in, or the weirdest dressing room? I've heard people dress inside abandoned school buses and stuff like that. What was been the weirdest in your case?
We did a couple shows at a club called Ruby Deluxe, and we were changing in the dressing room, which was used by drag queens, which was kind of funny, but it was not bad because there were a lot of mirrors there, so that kind of helped out a lot. So
right.
that was okay. It wasn't too bad. And most of the time, like in dressing rooms, you guys don't have any mirrors, like some bars, or like we've done bar shows where you're basically dressing out in your car. So and then you're having to wrestle like in the ring, but there's like dirt everywhere. So you have to like basically, it's like, can someone lay a mat down so we don't get the ring all dirty? So the city of Raleigh shows were fun that we did for 4th of July. They were really cool because you had like a huge crowd watching you. The only down part was you had to walk like 4 or 5 blocks to get to the ring, and you were changing like in some huge like in the civic center, and then you had to walk this way. And then sometimes it was really hot and sometimes it poured rain on you, so your gear was pretty rough.
Right. In all these years that you've been working, what are some of the things that you found disappointing about wrestling?
I think like the disappointing part is I don't think too many guys study the business. They don't, they don't have a good history of it. They kind of think wrestling started like in 1998, and it was always WWE, and they don't know the history or like how it actually started or the territories or anything. And, like I've been to Cauliflower Alley a few times, and I kind of, there's a lot of respect there, and you get for the old timers, the guys that were before you. And it was always great to get like a thumbs up from guys like Kevin Sullivan, because they like how you work and they think you've got a good character and stuff like that. So that's a lot of respect that you get. But for some of the guys that it's like, it's like, dude, it's like wrestling's been around and you really need to study on it and really just check it out. There's more to it than WWE, like some guys are always watching the pay-per-views, and it's like, as much as I didn't like the network going to Peacock and everything, but you've got so many years of pro wrestling on that application. And it's like, dude, like you can learn so much, and YouTube, but it's like, just study the business,
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. I only kept the network for that purpose, to see these old matches, and I found myself discovering guys that I've seen when I was a kid, but I didn't really pay attention to their work rate. Like the Heavenly Bodies. I became a huge fan of them now as an adult, because you're watching them like, damn, these guys were ahead of their time. What are your future plans, and where are you now in the business?
I'm at a good point where I think I'm ready to do like a few more years, and then maybe hang it up, and then maybe just go to training and promoting shows. So I've always liked wrestling. I've loved it since I was like 11 years old. So it's been a part of my life. I mean, you can't really say like I've gone to wrestling school and done shows and just like completely bury that. It's a hard thing to do, and it's really hard to get rid of that, and I love the whole, like the whole thing of pro wrestling has always been this form of entertainment and art, which I think it is. It's like a comic book come to life.
Right. And you mentioned Cauliflower Alley Club. Do you have any more stories from Cauliflower Alley Club?
Let's see. I didn't have to pay for a picture with Mil Mascaras. So
oh wow, that's a big deal, man.
I got away with a selfie with him. It's I would say like probably just the only thing I would say to people that go to Cauliflower Alley is like, go there, have fun, but get out and see Vegas, because it's like some people go there and they just stay in the hotel the whole time, and it's cool, but go out and try and explore the city, because it's like, there's a lot of fun you can have out there. And I looked at CAC as like a vacation anyhow. So I'm like, I'm out here, I'm going to have fun, I'm going to bullshit with the boys, maybe hear some good stories, and just see where things go from here. I'm out here to relax and have fun.
Right. No, that sounds awesome, man. It was always great watching you guys wrestle at APW, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to be on Indy Handshake today. Give us your links. Where can people find more information? Put yourself over.
You can find me. I have my fan page, which is Seymour Snott, and that's with 2 T's. I'm on Twitter at Seymour Snott, and I'm also on Instagram as Super Snot 1. And I'm pretty active on social media, so my pictures are always going up, and hopefully I can find more matches that I've had. I definitely recommend them. So just have fun and be entertained.
Sounds great. And thank you once again, Seymour Snott, and thank you for watching Indy Handshake. We'll see you next time.
All right.